Hello and welcome to Myalea. This episode is the second part of a two-part interview with Dr. Annie Crookes from the School of Law, Arts and Social Sciences. If you wish to check out part one, click the link in the description. Now back to the episode.
I'm just going to bring you back to Fiji, sorry.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So a couple of years back, there was this story going around on the news media about sex workers and the fact that they would use ICE to take, whenever they're doing their duties, responsibility. Yeah. Anyway, so when that story came out, there was this huge public outroar. Not in the sense that they were against the sex workers, because in Fiji we knew sex workers existed and we knew, all their operations, whatever. But the fact that they were taking ICE, that's what caused a public outroar. And what was really interesting was this public outcry rather. It wasn't more so that the sex workers were doing drugs, but that the sex workers were found to be doing drugs, which really was interesting to me, because when I was growing up in high school, there was another high school just beside ours, and in that high school there was this pathway going up to their school, and in that pathway you'd find like syringes where they inject you, or like packets of it. And of course, as high school students, we didn't understand it, so we'd like play around with it.
Oh my God.
Gosh.
Yeah. But when that came out, that's when stories started to come out that that ICE was in Fiji. That's when we had the first the first real concern that ICE was operational in Fiji. Now, while all that was going on, there was this ongoing debate about sex workers and their use of ICE. Just the fact that, and from the sex workers' perspective, you had organizations such as the Fiji Women's Rights Movement. They were coming out and saying, listen, this is what sex workers have to do. This is their bread and butter. If you cut it off, how will they sustain themselves? Not only sustain themselves, but in a society where sex workers are already decriminalized, they're already, they're going through so much, how will they support themselves? But then on the other hand, you have people saying, this is not right. This is a bad example of children. All this ongoing debate. So I just wanted to get your perspective as a psychologist, and maybe Rosa can, pitch in whatever. But just from that, explanation, what could be your take on it?
So, there's sort of several things. Sex workers taking drugs, part of that is this is a very difficult job that they're doing. It's already criminalized, so they're dealing with a lot of distress around it not being a legal form of work. And so drug taking would come from having to put up with a lot of the stress of that kind of life. And like you say, it might be their only option in terms of work. So with sex workers, it comes back to that idea of harm reduction. So things like absolutely to be, the problem with ICE being around, someone doing it personally for themselves is one thing. But if they use needles around schools or around, where children can get hold of it, that is a big problem for society. But it's about sort of saying, okay, well, then what we can do is have, if the sex workers are able to come forward to a space and use within, even use within a clinic or somewhere where it's in a safe environment, and access their own health services and access information and access counseling services, you get a reduction in the societal harm, which is maybe the main problem. And whether an individual sex worker is deciding to, or needs to do it for themselves, that's kind of maybe up to them. But so part of the first important step is to provide places where they can come in and get information and get health support, and with the drug use, have clean needle exchanges. And this is, I know I always come back to the UK, but it's sort of in terms of drug policies, that's what I've studied is the more sort of global ones. But the implementation of clean needle exchanges, and even in some places clinics where you can take the drug under nurse supervision, which is sort of an extreme thing. But at least the clean needle exchanges has massively decreased the societal influence of injection drug use. Things like AIDS and HIV and the diseases, simply, so you're sort of saying people are going to do what they're going to do, but at least for the society and population, we're going to start by reducing the harm of that those people's behaviors. Right. I mean, the other side, so with the sex workers, the other side of it is, so methamphetamine is kind of well known as a chemsex drug in the gay communities as well, like, again, in the UK and in other places. So it's kind of well known as something that's used as part of sexual activities. And so it's kind of it might be about sort of, again, it's this educating, saying to someone, why are you doing it? Is it because you need help and you need support? Is it because you're doing it because the guys wanted to do it with you, or, or like, does it help with your work in some way? Or, what we need to understand why sex workers are potentially doing that. And then, but as I say, kind of allow the priority would be the societal harm reduction, not necessarily dehumanizing and stigmatizing and throwing underground the people that happen to be found doing the drug as an individual.
I feel like that's also, I think that's in the Pacific, since again, we go back to this idea of communal living. I think that's why it's so shameful when, say, for example, one of your siblings in the family is doing ice. And they're sort of bringing out shame for the family as it's taking out for one. And they're also using a drug too, and they're doing all these taboo illegal activities. So I think, like, again, we go back to this, the inability to talk about your emotions and the inability to just say, I did something bad, and I know you're going to yell at me, and I know you're going to get mad at me, mother, father. But, that's also a part of the problem, eh? Sometimes, Pacific Islander parents will just yell at you either way, from what I've seen. Not mine, though. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. But I was talking with my friends. Me and my friends always have these sort of conversations. But one of them was saying, either way that I talk to my parent, they will always just yell at me. If I'm doing something good, they'll yell at me. If I'm doing something bad, they'll yell at me.
That's true.
So I think it also always just comes back to that, where individuals just get punished either way. Like, they're doing something bad, but they recover from it, they're going to get shamed for doing the bad thing anyway, Yeah. And I think when it comes to sex workers and people that use drugs in the Pacific, that might be coming from higher authority figures, like, governments and stuff. We might have a minister who releases a press conference and rather than talking about harm reduction, they talk about the bad action itself. So that's...
And I think, so one of the things is that idea of social rejection. So sex workers are already a rejected group from society.
That's true.
And so you can imagine it's almost like, well, people already hate me, so I'm just going to do anything and everything.
Anyway.
I've got no humanity left. And this is again the same thing that the research about chemsex has kind of shown, is that so for gay men, if their way of their sexuality has been already destigmatized. I grew up knowing that what I do is already bad, so I might as well just go all out. I've got nothing left to lose.
That's very true. And then when you don't have your family as your support background, especially that might be the case for a lot of sex workers, a lot of gay men, a lot of people in the LGBTQ community. When they don't have that foundation, they might as well just go out and do it anyway. Sex, all that stuff.
And so it's trying to put someone's humanity back, which is about that idea of just saying, well, talk to me about what's going on. Happening. Why are you doing it, or what are you going through? And so I think from what you were saying about sort of parenting and sort of children, the other sort of small part of it is the idea of children, meant to be seen, not heard, which I think is a little thing in the Pacific. And so, and not just in the Pacific, but that instead of shouting at the kids, or as well as shouting at the kids, that's the way parenting works. That's fine. But it's establishing a kind of, you're a person. Tell me what's going on. So I'm going to shout at you, and you're going to get punished. But why don't you explain what you're, it's sort of.
You may be a little person, but still a person.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's it. If children grew up learning that and being able to communicate their thoughts and communicate their emotions, and not even necessarily the bad ones, but kind of just being able to reflect and then talk about, or they're encouraged to talk about their mind and what's going on mentally for them, is going to have such a huge impact in their ability to communicate when they become an adolescent or an adult and they're going through actual distress. And I think maybe there isn't just, in many sort of communities and cultures, there's that idea that kids are not worth, like they're not intelligent enough yet to kind of have any thoughts that are worth talking about.
But they still have thoughts.
And there was, on a totally different thing, years ago, there was a study about sort of intelligence and kind of thing, and they were saying one of the things with young children is the more that the parents use mental words like, what do you think? using belief, kind of just asking questions. Doesn't matter what the kid says. The kid starts to understand that they're supposed to think and they're supposed to have opinions and beliefs. And that's a really important tool for them as they grow up.
Yeah.
And so I have two things. First, just on the topic of, just before I forget it and I lose it, but just the topic of, in Pacific Islander cultures, you're not encouraged to think outside of the box. Very much communal. Think within the group. And also the idea of slapping kids as a form of parenting.
Oh, yes.
My brother brought this up because they were having a debate in social science class, and he was asking me, my mother, my sister's opinion on it. And first my sister started off by saying, yeah, we should smack the kids. And so he was like, right. But then we all stopped and we paused, and then we explained to him, slapping kids objectively from our perspective can be harmful. You are literally smacking your kid. But he brought up something really interesting. And he said that all the kids who were against slapping their child were, quote unquote, westernized. And then I was like, that is really, really interesting. It's so ingrained into our culture. The idea of punishing your kid physically is so ingrained into your culture that when you speak out against it, when you say, I'm not going to smack my kids even though I'm Tongan, you're seen as not being Tongan or not being or being whitewashed. And that really stuck out to me, and I tried my best to explain to him, because he still is young. But I tried to explain to him, there's a psychological aspect where we learn about I forgot if it's operant or classical conditioning. Please don't look at me like that. but when you have a stimulus and then you associate it with fear, that stimulus and the person, carrying out the stimulus becomes a figure of fear. And so even though you might have made up with your parents, something like that, you're going to end up fearing your parent, and you're going to end up not wanting to talk to your parent, not wanting to share your thoughts with your parent. And then I also had this similar conversation with another one of my friends. She's not Islander, but she is, how do I say this? From a communal culture. So keep her anonymous. But then we were talking about it, and then I was saying I'm very much against slapping my child. And then she said, you wouldn't get it. You weren't smacked. And I was like, I was very much smacked as a child. It's it's a very interesting topic. And I just want to hear you guys' thoughts on it. Smacking your child as punishment. And then also how people think of it as a staple in Pacific Islander communities and parenting. And it is. And I love the memes. I will laugh at them.
Especially when you have a belt, extension cord, a guitar.
A piano. And so again, it comes back to this, Islanders, we joke about it. We joke about it all the time. I think because we might have something called toxic positivity, where we always have to put a smile on your face so that you don't, again, I'm raining on the parade where we're talking about memes, but it's true. Islanders, we just laugh about it, and I think it's because although you're laughing and joking about it, at least you're subtly talking about it, and at least you're getting that relief off your chest. But what do you have to say?
Oh. Before I go into that very, very, very contentious topic, I just wanted to pick up on something you said earlier about, going back to sex work, is how two things can be right at the same time, where you can provide that space for them to sort of come in, talk about the issues, talk about what they're going through, and providing them with that health and mental health that they need, and also, reducing societal harm. I think two things can be right at the same time. And, it draws back to policy as well. Because currently in Fiji, I haven't read the Constitution, but not complete though. But I do know that drugs at the moment, it's still illegal. But and also the sex workers, it's still decriminalized, or it's still dehumanized as well. So, just going back to that in terms of policy, and at the moment, there's no concrete law that we can rely on to, sort of socially accept social workers and the work that they're doing, So let me just touch on that, then we can jump back to that one. In terms of policy, and you have worked in the policy area, what are some challenges around this field of work, and what are some of the opportunities for improvement?
Yeah, it's so hard with policy because policy is going to have a longer term effect, a policy change. And so you could say, okay, if we decriminalize and sex work and allow sort of people to do it, in the short term, that may be a negative impact, slightly, what's seen as negative impacts in the short term. But in the longer term, of course, it would mean the better health effects and this kind of reduced harm of sex work in the longer term. So it's very difficult for politicians because they have their yearly term, their elections that they've got to kind of work towards. So I suppose the word decriminalized is because that's with the drug sort of things. That's what's happened is if we say it's decriminalized in that, if you are trafficking it, that's illegal. But if you are an individual taking it for individual use, that's now a health issue and not a legal issue. And that allows individuals to come forward if they need help. And so there may, if there was a way of implementing policies around that. So if there was a way of sort of saying, okay, elements of sex work, are still illegal. But if you are a sex worker, you do have legal access to something. So obviously we should sort of say there are charities and advocacy groups that are, supporting sex workers and doing a fantastic job. But of course they are underfunded because they're working with an illegal, decriminalized group of people.
Exactly. Yep.
But they are doing what they can. So, but yeah, it's difficult because again, sort of what I know from the UK, what they've done is they've said brothels are still illegal. Sex work is decriminalized, but brothels are illegal. And the problem with that is brothels are actually the safest space because it means you've got a sex worker is in a group, may have a security on the door, has, sort of filtering mechanisms, have someone that's kind of managing the processes, is off the streets. So that kind of hasn't worked. But if there was a way of saying this is okay if you have to do it, but another part of it, the full part of it isn't. So that's kind of, it's difficult. It's difficult policy, but it
is really difficult. And sometimes it gets really frustrating. Yeah, very much. Very much. But just on that point that you made as well, talking about organizations, NGOs that work with sex workers, that work with this, the marginalized people of society, and the fact that they are underfunded because from up there, how they view these organizations, it's like they're working with something that they don't really believe in.
Agreed.
And then goes on.
It's like you're just supporting the illegal people, the illegal activity.
Exactly. And I just want to put on the record, for Radio Pasifik, we're so appreciative of the work done by Fiji Women's Rights Movement as well as Fiji Women's Crisis Center. Yeah. These two organizations, as well as the helpline that we have, these three organizations have been really helpful in, just starting the conversation about counseling, about psychology, just getting that mental support that we're talking about. Yeah. Just trying to get that started in Fiji, because a lot of the trauma and whatever and whatnot, a lot of that is still around. So I'm just appreciative of the fact that they have started the conversation, and then hopefully it just turns out to be, something that we can all use in the future. Yeah. Anyway. Well, and I was just thinking another thing while you were talking, because I suppose one of the other things would be to find a way to separate. So one of the issues is sex workers who are beaten up and violently abused by their client cannot go to the police because that abuse happened during sex work, which is illegal. Exactly. So if the police were better sort of trained and the legal issues were more clear, that if you come in and you've been beaten up, that is an illegal act, and we will investigate and prosecute whoever did that to you, and we're going to separate that from what from the sex work, which maybe that's still going to be illegal, but at the moment you've come to us because of a clearly illegal action that you are the victim of. And so maybe something like that could be sort of more clearly established, where the police will kind of overlook or will separate the sex work from you coming in at this point and needing help for something illegal that has happened to you. Let me just jump on this. Because I feel like I just want to talk about this.
So true. I need to pause and go back to the conversation.
But yes, corporal punishment. Yes.
Corporal punishment. That's the word.
That. So I remember when I was in class 5, we got the word that corporal punishment has been outlawed in Fiji. Right. And I think it's also in the constitution as well. But just growing up, class 1 to class 5, I went to a school that's just nearby here, Rewanga. And then from then I went to General College. But just in that primary school, because the kids that came to that school were kids from communities that had a lot of violence, just very, for lack of words, very dodgy communities, yeah? So the teachers who were there at the time, they would go out on all of their punishments. They had this belt that allegedly was made of tire. I don't know whether it was illegal to hit on kids. They had
joking about it to cope because the trauma is still there.
and then you have some teachers who, while explaining to the class with a duster in hand, and then I stood me talking.
And you must be so horrified because corporal punishment isn't like legal, isn't? But us, like, we get it. No, because sorry if I just chip in, but people tend to discredit the fact that I was in a public islander school for many years because my high school education was expensive. But yeah,
right.
For us, we had a story that that one of the teachers used a stick that had like nails in it.
Oh my gosh!
And you must be horrified. But like Manoa and I are just
laughing about it.
but continue your story. I just wanted to tell you about the stick.
But I think one of the things with the education, with the corporal punishment in classrooms,
Right.
which was, did happen in, like, I mean, not as recently as it has here, but obviously did happen when I was a kid, a little bit in private schools. But I think so the issue is, teachers are dealing with large classes, and previously, until, as we know, very recently, corporal punishment was allowed, and that was kind of expected, and that aligned to what the kids were getting as punishment and penalties when at home. So it kind of all sort of, okay, this is what we expect. And then for the right reasons, it was removed as, corporal punishment is no longer allowed in the schools, but no training to teachers about the reinforcement, about other ways to discipline children, zero
Exactly.
training. So the teachers are now like, we're doing our best, but we don't know what else we're supposed to do that's effective. Maybe we just shout or we do whatever, but we're not trained in what else is effective. You can't just remove one thing without replacing it with what you are saying is the more effective
That's
tool.
very true. Teachers aren't educated on positive and negative reinforcement, and they're not educated on positive or negative punishment.
And it's a very difficult job that they're doing.
We need them more money. But sorry, back to Mano.
Policymakers is thinking inside a very small box.
It's very easy for them to make something illegal without actually the resources and the training and the money that you need to make that work.
But what were you saying about corporal punishment before?
Anyway, yes. So it came to a point in class 5, and mind you, when we were in primary school, there were 2 teachers that we were so frightened of that two teachers, and the mere mention of their names would get us so scared.
It would strike fear in our hearts.
And we just, no matter how unruly we were, the mention of those teachers' names would be like, okay, I'm going to be a good student.
So it worked.
It worked,
to some extent.
But yeah, in class 5, these 2 teachers, they came in, and the principal at the time said that there was a student that was, just being unruly and just being, how should I say, was very disruptive in class. And he was at the top of that list. So this student was brought in from another class, brought to our class, made to stand in front of our class. And mind you, this student was in class 6 and we were in class 5. And these 2 teachers would be on the side, and they'd box the ears to a point where he was literally lifted up. And when they were they did it for 5 seconds, and then when they put the child down, his ears were so red. It was so, and that moment made me think, do we really need corporal punishment? Does it have to go that far?
Yeah.
I understand punishment, but if it's punishment to that extent where, you're causing more harm and more damage to the child, not only physically, but also mentally. Because these are children who come from very damaged families already. They have so much with them bringing to school. And who knows, maybe school is a place where they find comfort, where they find their friends and their support system, And then if you're creating this culture of fear by the people that's supposed to create that sort of space, if they're not doing that, then, the child will just have no outlet, And it was also very interesting because 3 years after that, I heard the child committed suicide, drank paraquat. And the very reason that that was said to me was this child, he didn't have that outlet or someone to talk to. It was just that, pack mentality and just, no one really caring about what he was going through.
And it's always the kids that, what I've seen through my years of public schooling, when you corporally punish the child who is making the most nonsense, they're just going to do it again.
Exactly.
They're just going to do it again.
They'll find new ways to do it.
Yeah.
They'll just find better ways to do it. Either that or they'll internalize it.
Yeah.
And they'll get to a really bad point.
Yeah.
And I think it's difficult. So the thing with, corporal punishment is clearly there's no actual line. So corporal punishment could go from a slap that maybe everyone says, okay, that's all right, to something like what
that,
you've described, which is that's just cruel. Beyond that's absolutely awful that would, and in front of people, and that's just mean and cruel and violent and abusive. But corporal punishment has no. They're just saying it's allowed or it's not allowed, and there's no definition of what it is.
Yeah.
So it allows it to exacerbate, and not that the teachers are necessarily evil, but their intensity is going to grow and grow as their frustration grows about the kids' behavior, as they have, they don't know what else to do about it. So it just gets really easy to get out of hand. And then I think the other thing is it's very easy on a population level. Like you guys were part of a corporal punishment system, and you're both perfectly fine.
Thankfully,
sure about that?
So it's very easy for people to say, "Well, it worked. Look, you were scared of those teachers, so you behaved." But the problem is, probably you were going to behave anyway. And that fear, the fear works on the portion of people of young people who are fine and probably not going to be acting out, whereas there's always going to be the minority, a small group for whom the corporal punishment is not going to do anything to their bad behaviors and is actually just going to make their lives worse and make their mental health worse. It's difficult.
And again, I talk about culture shock because I had like 5 culture shocks in the same country. But when I went from public schooling to private schooling, and I saw the complete difference between how teachers are treated in public school versus how teachers are treated in private school. Of course, because private schools have more resources, teachers are accommodated more for their time, for their resources. Classrooms are really fancy, everything's clean. And so it makes me wonder when first of all, let me get back to what the original point was, but it was crazy to me how the authority figures weren't these big, high up, almost gods, because I felt like in my old public school there was always just a tiny, not tiny, there was always an element of fear, and there was always this feeling that you couldn't go to your teacher and talk to them properly because there was, like I said, lots of corporal punishment, lots of fear instilled into you. When I went to private school, it was so strange because I still had that fear of authority instilled into me, but with the teachers being so lovely and not, hitting us or anything, I was also able to find this really interesting middle ground where I respected them, just, subconsciously from my public school years. But I was also able to just talk to them like talk to them like we're friends, or talk to them like an adult. And I find that really interesting compared to the way that I can't talk to authority figures back in public school, where I talk to them like, they're high up and I'm down here. And in private school, it's very much equality, very much equal. You can just ask a weird question to your teacher and they will answer it. They won't shame you for it. They'll answer it. They might laugh at you for a little bit, but they won't. There's nothing too intense. That's what I noticed. That's just something that I wanted to throw out there. And it might also tie into, again, cultural differences. Again.
And it's also interesting to note that with that line of authority figures, it's not only in Pacific cultures, especially in Fiji. It's not you don't only find that in the classroom where you have my 2 teachers, but it's also very common in households as well. Growing up, if you come from a household where the dad is not the only one that's administering punishment or administering smacks and all that, but also the mom is doing it. So if 2 parents are, constantly disciplining their child, obviously the meaning beating, then the child will not have any outlet to go talk to, and if there's such a disconnect between the child and the siblings, then it would sort of make sense if the child resorts to other avenues such as drug use to just detach for that very brief of time. I remember that when I was in that primary school that I had friends who were also beaten at home. I mean, I've also been beaten by my mom, but not to that extent, because I feel like with my mom, she had that subconscious thinking that this is still my child, this is flesh of my flesh, so I won't do anything to him. Maybe just a tiny scratch, but nothing too extreme. Yeah, but when I used to hear stories from my primary school friends on how they were disciplined at home, I'm just sitting there like, whoa, my mom beats me, but she doesn't beat me like that, you know, like to the point where, you know, going outside. I'm not sure if you know, there's a plant in Fiji where the tea leaves, the tea leaves. The tea leaves, they also have the spiky thing coming out.
Oh, yeah.
So some of my friends have beaten me that. Not only that, you know, the scrubbing board might even get beaten with that. So, and I'm just sitting there and thinking, wow, like, not only did it make me feel appreciative of how I was disciplined, but it also made me feel sad as well.
Yeah.
Because, you know, at that very delicate age, being in primary school, you know, they've yet to experience the world for what it is, but because of how they were treated at home, not given that space to, you know, think or even express how they feel, you know, they're just gonna have that sort of that fear in their minds, you know, that they won't be able to talk to adults or their uncles or their aunties because these are the people who constantly beat the you know, daylights out of the kid.
And then at one point does it just become a way for the parent to vent their anger out?
Exactly.
It does.
Yeah.
And then it's gotten to the point where it's just normalized, you know? If you have one family that's beating their kid, the other family will be like, oh, they're just disciplining, we shouldn't butt in.
Yeah.
They only will butt in when, you know, the child is really screaming for help.
Yeah.
But it's like, you should have intervened before, you know? Like,
because things like this tend to build up.
It does.
I mean, I think, so obviously agree with what you're saying, but at the same time, we have to, like, none of us have kids in this next group. And so, you know, parenting is hard, and parenting large families with lots of kids, very, very hard. And so it's difficult. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to kind of judge when you're like, the parents are doing the best that they know how. And that's, of course, the other thing is it's generational. That's how they were disciplined.
That's true.
And they, as far as they're concerned, they've turned out okay. So this works. You know, and it just kind of carries on. So it is really difficult to just sort of you know, it's very easy to be outside of that and go, oh, you just shouldn't do it. You know, it's a very tough thing
I was supposed to raise a kitten, and that was the closest thing I came to parenting. And oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
You have to feed it, you have to clothe it.
I literally, like, we adopted this little cat. She's so cute, by the way. She's still a troublemaker. We adopted this cat. And I remember after the first week, I went up to my mom and I looked at her and I was like, Mom, thank you so much. I just want to thank you for giving me this life. I want to thank you for parenting me. I know sometimes I'm a lot, but like, I just get it. I get it now. And so, like you said, it's really easy to speculate when you aren't in that position.
Yeah.
Very, very
true. But I also just want to put it out there that as much as that was the norm, and it still is a norm, I think with the current generation coming up, you know, our generation when they have kids, or just generally the change as well. Now with social media and just, you know, people having that access to information on how to proper parent. Properly parent. I think that's, you know, the norm has slightly changed from what we grew up with the normal beating and stuff, to now going to maybe seldomly beating. If it really necessitates, then the stick will apply. But other than that, then it's just, you know, just talking with the child. Because now, while I'm in university, just looking at my community, because also my community, where I come from, growing up, it wasn't the best of communities. We also have family that did beat their child. But now, at this age, now that all the kids in my community have all grown up, it's gotten to a point where the parents are just having normal conversation with their children, you know? And of course, you'd have that one child that, you know, just act out of place and just be a disturbance, and rightfully that the stick will apply there. But it's just more so of just talking and creating that support group. And I should also mention that in most communities, they have a youth group. And I really like the idea of a youth group because it gives that that sort of support system to the youth. And these youth groups are not led by the adults; it's led by the youth.
Yeah.
So, you know, kind of doing away with the narrative that the parents are the authority figures. It's just looking at your leader, you see that leader is someone that looks like you.
That's
you know, someone in your age range. So it just opens up that clear communication where you can just be frank.
Yeah.
And just be honest, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I was just going to, because when you were talking sort of earlier, I thought it came to my mind about the idea of fear versus respect. You mentioned about, sort of, so you would follow the instructions of someone because you respect them, but also, because you fear them. So it's kind of people making a choice about what kind of leader they want to be. But within the Pacific communities, it's interesting that under the parents beating their children kind of scenario, the parents and the teachers need to lead through fear is what they're assuming. So they said, oh, we're going to penalize. But the elders of the community lead by respect. So the children do what the village elders say because they respect them, not because I presume the elders are beating them as much as their parents are beating them.
Let's just pretend that they are.
Okay, well, I am guessing. But it's an interesting thing that the mid-level have to get fear, but the top level can just lead by respect. And it's maybe just being able to suggest to the families and the parents that actually the kids respect this guy because of his wisdom and what he's able to guide. So they will listen if they respect you. They will also do what you need them to do.
Children will listen.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be a fault, but they will always listen. What do you have to say about this, Manoa? Because in Tonga, we don't really have this. We don't really have villages. We have towns, but we don't really have that village life. So what do you think?
I think in the traditional context, definitely when you have those elders where the kids will just naturally respect, just look up to. Because in Fiji, the custom and traditions are still very strong. In most Fijian communities, it's still very much intact. With regards to disciplining kids, it is very true what you said, that the middle level is sort of exerting like that authoritative like figure on the child. But when it comes to elders, and when I say elders here, I'm meaning like uncles or grandfather twice removed from the mom's side or dad's side, because again it's a very tightly knit community. You'll see that the children are more they're more close to these elders compared to how close they are with their parents. And that is because these elders, not only do they give advice, but they sort of show the child on how, or rather, the right way to live in the society. Because elders in the community, they also play a role in disseminating our culture, in educating the child that this is how it should be. If you ever go to a village, this is what you should do. Be respectful. Those kind of things. And it really brings back to the idea of just talking, discussions. Because at the end of the day, if you're gonna instill information by way of fear or by way of the stick, that information will not stick very long with the child. But if you just talk with them, just in a very casual conversation that this is the things that you have to do, it's going to stick with the child, because at the back of subconsciously the child will be like, oh, this is a very frank conversation, and the child will eventually engage. I remember when I first went to my village is in Rao, by the way. Mind you, I was raised in the city, so I'm like the typical bread boy. Oh, Mandrai, this is Mandrai. Yeah, so when I first went to my village, I had that whole, that subconsciously in my head that I had to be respectful. I had to, my dressing has to be okay. My how I speak should be okay. But then when we sat for our first family or clan meeting, just the way my uncles from the village and my elders, how they interacted with me was so different from how my own family interacted with me. Like at home, it would be in the city house, it would be, don't talk to this uncle in that way, or don't joke with this particular auntie, like always be respectful when you're talking to the middle level in that sense. But then when you come to the village, when I came to the village, it was just regular conversation. They did ask me about my school, how it's going. Then I'd tell them this, that, and then whenever they bring up a cultural practice that I know nothing of, then I'll be like, oh, that's interesting. Would you mind telling me more about it? And then they just go on a whole 30-40 minutes just explaining it, and I could tell that they were really excited to just disseminate the information. And this was really interesting to me. While explaining, they go cook or go do something else with the mat or something, and I'm just sitting like, wow, that is so nice. Wow. And it just got to a point where when I was in high school, I preferred going to the village more than staying at home.
Yeah.
Like when it was school holiday, I would just tell my mom, I'm going to the village. I'm going to spend time with so-and-so uncle or so-and-so auntie.
But it's sort of, it's because the respect was mutual. It's that, like, you know, they had talked to you like another human.
Yes.
You know, and so actually they were able to suggest to you what you should do and you would do it, as opposed to you being told what to do, the authoritarian. They were sort of saying, well, you know, you're an equal human, but let me teach you the way to be a good human, a good part of the community.
And even when I observed the family dynamics when I went to the went to the house in the village, the family dynamics were just very, very respectful. You know, how they talked, how they discussed, even at the dinner table. You know, my uncle would come in and ask my cousins, how was your day? Did you go to the garden? Did you do this? Did you do that? And if my cousin said, but we did this, but we didn't do that, then it's just a very just a rebuke at best. Just saying that, but make sure tomorrow when you wake up you go do that.
Yeah,
you know, just a small rebuke like that. You
Absolutely.
know, and that really goes a long way because
children already respect you.
And even for the child, because not only for my cousin, but also for me as well, you know, like it just really made me question a lot of things growing up.
But it also, to go right back to what you started about the actual psychology of it all, about conditioning theory.
It's all about conditioning theory.
But what we know, again, at least from the science of kind of operant conditioning reinforcement, is that positive reinforcement is far more powerful to get someone to change their behavior than punishment. And so the idea of a rebuke and sort of, you know, what they're effectively saying is I appreciate what you have done. And so they've reinforced the positive behavior, and that's going to encourage you and motivate you to do the extra thing tomorrow or whatever it is. And that's a far more powerful behavioral tool. And again, hard if you're a teacher with 50 kids and acting up, but trying to focus. And also in terms of mental health with the kids that are, you know, with challenging environments or challenging intellectual disabilities or whatever, it's sort of focusing on strengths. You know, reinforcement is a way of saying you did good. Like there's some good things about you. And then that's super powerful for kids to grow up feeling that they are valued and that they, you know, that, okay, fine, I failed at this and I acted out today, but I actually fundamentally made a good human. And that's so important.
And so sorry for our listeners, operant conditioning is?
So operant conditioning is a way of shaping behavior. So what we do is we would, when you do an action and then your brain kind of figures out what happened next. So did I get punished for that action or did I get a reward for that action? And that's the process of operant conditioning. And the idea is that if I got rewarded in some way, then I'm going to do more of the action again, because that's how the brain understands how to survive in the world. Whereas if I do an action and it doesn't work, or I get, you know, punished, or something bad happens because of it, then my brain knows never to do that again. And so that's just a simple cognitive process.
We can explain to Manoa. And so,
I don't do that. I don't do that with a thing.
And so when we were talking about corporal punishment, I was just trying to bring up that it's a form of would it be positive or negative punishment?
So it's punishment. So it would be positive punishment.
It would be
positive. So it would be spanking, or something.
So then you have removing positive stimulus or adding negative stimulus. And so for corporal punishment, you are adding a smack. And all that and like all that does is, well, it's supposed to make you stop your behavior, but like we said, sometimes that doesn't work.
It's not as powerful. Like the same, I mean, the other way would be, you know, taking the kid's phone or taking their rights away, or as we do with criminal justice, putting you in prison is taking away your freedom. And again, psychology from tens of years has said punishment doesn't work, and yet our whole criminal justice system is based on it. But it's sort of like exactly like you say. So from an immediate point, okay, fine, I won't do that again. But actually, I'm going to forget that punishment and I'm going to do something very similar or whatever. Whereas reinforcing what's good is actually a much, you know, your brain hangs on to that a lot more.
Because you get a good little feeling, and I don't know what chemical it is, but you get a feeling, and then you're like, "Ooh, I want that feeling again." But that does all of the topics that we just talked about was just all tied into psychology. You know, that's why I love psychology. It comes back to very, very, very simple things: policies, you know, schooling, education. It comes back to your little brain and the little motions that happen in there. So. We are running a little bit out of time. We have about 20 minutes.
We didn't even go for a break. But I still have to conversation so much.
So good. But I just like to touch on the fact that, you know, from psychology, Freud might have had some really weird theories. For our listeners and for Manoa, he had some really weird theories that I don't agree with. But he was the first person to say that talking helps you. Basically, all in all, he was talking helps with what's going on up here. And I do respect him for that. And I do think having conversations like this in our communities, in schools, with our friends, with the radio station people, I think that can go a really long way. So yeah. Anything else?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I definitely believe talking is a really good way.
Powerful.
It's and I mean that's why in the Pacific cultures we have this concept of talanoa, not only at grassroots levels, but we also have it up in at high end meetings. You know, just the concept of talanoa where people can just come in, you know, sit down and just know that when they share whatever they have to share, that it's gonna be respected. That everyone will give you the respect that you give them. I think in Pacific culture, it's also about reciprocity. Yeah. But personally, for me, I found talking is just an effective way to just de-stress, you know, de-stress or just, you know, telling about what my experience is. Like even if I have a happy day in school, I'd obviously want to go home and tell my mom about it. But obviously, even if I have a bad day, so I'd also want to go home and tell my mom about it. I think growing up, I didn't really appreciate the concept of talking, but when I came to university, that's when I started to realize, oh, talking is really effective, you know. And I also noticed from my mom's point of view, that's also what she appreciates from me, that, you know, she wants to know what's happening in my life, but because she doesn't want to intrude, she doesn't ask me certain questions. But it's only when I open up to her, you know, tell her about what my lectures, what I'm learning in school, that's when she starts asking questions like, oh, okay, so you learned this, but okay, and how does that relate to Fiji, you know, or if I'm talking about economics, oh, really? So can you explain this to me?
Yeah.
Just certain things, not only with my mom, but also with my grandma. She's 80 years old, and when I tell her these new things that I'm learning in school, she'll be like, oh, wow, okay, so can you just explain this again to me?
Yeah, feeling like what you have to say is valued is such a nice feeling.
Yeah.
It's such a nice feeling.
And I just find,
a long way.
yeah, and I just find talking not only with my mom, my grandmother, my aunties, but also with my cousins as well, those who are my age, but also younger than me. I found that just by speaking to someone is very relaxing. And even better, if you're speaking to someone you know, someone that you relate, that you're related to, or someone that you care about, speaking to that person and just having that sort of atmosphere of respect that you're comfortable in, it is so relaxing. Like, yeah,
it's so, it comes back to, there are so many positives and sources of strength for mental health in the Pacific cultures, because, you know, what you're describing is essentially counseling, you know.
That's right.
It's essentially, that is what counseling is, and the power of it when you go into a sort of formal counseling session, because someone is just there to listen to you. They're not going to judge you. They're not going to tell their point of view and their opinion, tell you what to do. They're just going to listen. And that in itself is so incredibly powerful. And, you know, and I think that what you've described is kind of, well, that's effectively already in the culture. And I think, you know, it's about maybe part of taking away the stigma of mental health and counseling is kind of saying counseling isn't, you're already doing it. It's already here. You know, it's when you go and see a counselor, they're just going to be doing the same thing in a non-judgmental way as the people that you share your stories with anyway. And that's so important. And then I think the other thing you were saying about, you know, this idea of reciprocity and sharing, because it isn't just about talking, it's about sharing as well. And being able to, because that's how we normalize. If I'm able to share my story of distress or like a breakup or, you know, something else happened, and then, you know, and then someone that I'm sharing with says, oh yeah, that happened to me too. I mean, can you imagine the power of talking to your mom and saying, you know, I've just had this massive breakup, and, you know, and your parent going, oh, when I was young, you know, I had this massive breakup too. It would be so powerful to sort of say we've connected over that. And then I
that.
Look at this, look at the podcast, look at what happened. But that's so true. You know, all the things that we go over in psychology when it comes to counseling, it's there. It's in our culture. It's just that those elements of taboo, in Tonga we call it tapu, the element of shame, all these other, you know, external factors tend to sort of corrupt it. So it's very, very true. You know, talking can go a long way.
It can.
Yeah.
So anything else
I
before
think
we wrap up and then do our program stuff?
But I think just generally, and this is an opinion that I've held for the longest time ever since I've been in university, is, incorporating psychology or a similar discipline down to high school levels.
Yes.
Because there's a huge need for it in high schools.
Yeah.
Because as much as I appreciate the other subjects that's there and the hard work that the teachers have done, I also think that there's so much that students want to do and want to express, but they can't do it because of the public school authoritative fear. And on that same note as well, what we do lack in Fiji is counselors.
Yeah.
Counselors and incorporating psychology. And this was really a topic that I had in my circle, in one of my politics circle, that, in Fiji, as much as we value economics, accounting, English, maths, and all the other generic subjects, that's fine. But you got to also put in these new subjects where psychology comes in, even civic education, all these other new subjects. Not only does it give a varied content, but it also gives students that option to choose. Because, students, when they come from primary school to high school, from the generic subjects, chemistry and all that, it's just that they're going from one box, they're fitting into another box. Yeah. And how the public school works is that you're made to think in this sort of very limited space. And incorporating subjects such as psychology and civic education, you're encouraging the students to think outside of that box.
Yeah.
And that also is where, when you move from high school to tertiary, that's where the divide comes in. Yeah. Because subjects such as psychology, social work, all these humanities subjects that we don't have in high school is now taught here. So, just getting students to, just familiarizing students with the subjects offered in university, but also just getting them to take up the subjects, think outside the box, and while doing the subjects in high schools, for them to identify the trauma, the unaddressed trauma they've gone through, just unpacking the sort of issues that they've been holding on to unconsciously, and just getting them to address it there. I just feel like it would be a really good idea to have psychology and also counselors. Yeah,
I think there's a really some really amazing work being done with what's called positive education, which would so rather than sort of formally teaching psychology, it's about in schools. Having things like problem-solving skills, emotional awareness skills, even having, where there's resources available, but having a room that's a little quiet space. And so to say to little kids, if you guys are about to fight, or you feel like you're so like, oh my God, I'm so angry, I just want to hit something, why don't you go to the little quiet room that's cool, slightly darker, maybe it's part of the a church sort of room or somewhere in the school, it's got cushions, and we're going to teach you how to breathe. And you're going to breathe and count to 10 and do all those kind of sort of things that sound like self-help, but teaching kids that they could walk away and just calm themselves down and self-soothing actually not only has a positive impact on the environment of the school being a very much more positive and less fighting, but has been shown to reduce the need for counseling because kids have their own mental health tools. And so it's cost effective as well. Nice. It would be a cheaper way of needing to employ lots and lots of counselors. So there's some really fantastic work that we could do in the Pacific, because it isn't necessarily about loads and loads of extra money. It's just changing the curriculum a little bit.
And I think on that as well, and of course, with this particular endeavor, it might take some time till we see this materialize, because on the other side as well, we also have to consider the society we live in. Yeah. In the Pacific, because we've had the subject for so long, and we've never had this sort of safe space, the safe room you're talking about, and also just awareness on mental health issues, or just issues that young people go through that old generations cannot relate to. If we were to put in this positive education, I think society has to also change the mindsets, change the attitudes towards it. Because again, going back to what your brother said, if a student, Pacific Island student, goes into that or uses that safe room, they'll be seen as westernized. Yeah. So just changing how society views it. How we think.
Or adapting it. I'm explaining it from the Western perspective, but there must be ways of making it fit with the traditions, so it's just about adapting these things, taking the learning from the West.
That's right.
And okay, let's see how we could, that's an idea, let's see how we could make that happen here. But it doesn't have to look exactly the same. It's just an idea.
Just contextualize it.
But I think I would say is like my little final word. I think it is changing because you guys are an example, and this podcast is an example of younger generations are talking, you know. So that would be my thing, is it clearly is changing because these things are now happening. So
sorry, let us just fangirl.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Annie. We've come to the end of our episode. To our listeners, make sure you tune into our next podcast. You can find us on Spotify and our other socials, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook on Radio Pacific.